All right, I think it's about time we can get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Brian Pettiville, member of the IAB Cal Board of Directors and past chairman of the IAB Cal Emerging Leaders Committee. Today we are very excited to have Nick Kormos, CIC CPIA. He's the Vice President of MarshBerry, and today Nick will be presenting Creating an Agency Sales Culture. Nick is Vice President and Unit Leader of MarshBerry's Sales Management Division. His team focuses on producer training, coaching, and agency sales culture development. Nick has more than 12 years of sales and sales management experience and has completed several years of formal sales training courses. Prior to joining MarshBerry, Nick spent more than 6 years of his career in production and management roles as an independent agency. For today's webinar, we have muted all of your phones to eliminate any of the background noise, but keep in mind you can still ask questions throughout the webinar, and that can be done by entering those questions into the toolbar of the GoToMeetings. And after the presentation, we'll be addressing all those questions. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Nick, and I'll have him take it away.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us. Well, it's afternoon for me, but morning for you. I am as you said, I'm Vice President of Sales Performance here at MarshBerry, and basically what that means is we try to help all agencies figure out what are the actual action items and things that they need to grow. But what I'm really going to be talking about today is why producers don't produce. As I travel all over the country and I meet with producers and agencies, and I meet with hundreds of them, I do about 120 days on the road every year, and I get the question all the time, why don't producers produce? Why, when we poll our clients and we say, what is the biggest challenge facing your organic growth ability going forward, the number one answer all the time is non-producing producers. And we don't really, at MarshBerry, understand what that means. A non-producing producer isn't really a producer. It's kind of like a non-golfing golfer. It's a unicorn. It doesn't really exist. I mean, what we really have is non-performing producers, and why is that? And so what we're really going to start off with is something that you might not like me for, and that is why it's actually leadership's fault. Why we need to take, indicating ownership and leadership within our agencies have to take the responsibility of dealing with non-performing producers and why it's leadership's fault. And then we're going to kind of break down what I call the 3 T's of why producers don't produce. So jumping right in, when we poll our agencies across the country at our peer exchange events and our various surveys, as I mentioned earlier, the resounding answer as far as challenges to organic growth are non-producing producers. But what we think is interesting is that only about 5% say that it's leadership's fault. But at the end of the day, if you think about if you have a non-performing employee, if you have a non-performing CSR, account executive, account manager, whose fault is that other than leadership? And we have to kind of embrace this. And again, I don't mean to come on this webinar and slap any wrists, but I just feel like we need to embrace the things that actually need to be done in order to understand what bottlenecks producers are facing in today's world. So I'm going to break down the 3 T's, and that's time, training, and tenacity. As we meet with hundreds of producers and we coach actively on a regular basis over 100 producers across the country, we are faced with one of these 3 things for any non-performing producer. It always follows into one of these categories. And so the first one is time. Now, I kind of asked a rhetorical question since all of you are muted anyways. Is time really a legitimate excuse? Is it really legitimate for producers to say, gosh, I just don't have enough time to prospect? And the answer is, actually, sometimes it is a legitimate excuse. And so what we hear is, I don't have capacity, I don't have enough time to prospect. So what are the potential solutions then at this point that we can examine as agency owners and leaders? First one, provide additional support. So if our producers are doing too much non-production work, meaning processing and marketing renewals, attending every open enrollment meeting if it's employee benefits, or actually having their hands ingrained into processing certificates of insurance and adding vehicles and doing all of those things, a lot of times they do it because they feel indebted to the prospect and they feel like they want to be their guy or girl in their time of need, when in reality we have the infrastructure available to kind of pass some of those things off. And so providing additional support is in some cases needed with these agencies to really be able to drive the producer's time and make it more efficient and more about hunting and actually producing. The other thing that we look at is removing small accounts. So I always use the story. I met with a producer in Wisconsin who kind of gave me the line of, hey, I don't have time to prospect, and I was really thinking that maybe they weren't really committed or they weren't putting in the hours. But then when we looked at her book of business, she had about $400,000 in revenue in her book, which was decent, but she had 762 accounts. And so the reality is that producer is never going to grow. And I admitted to her, I said, you're right, you don't have the capacity. There's no way you're ever going to be able to increase your income the way your book is currently structured. And so we have to get rid of some of those small accounts out of the book of business. And so we really think about the science of book growth and what is really driving the producer's ability to grow. Every single $1 million plus producer that we've run across has told us that they couldn't have gotten there if they didn't increase their average account size and decrease the number of accounts over time. And so when we really look at that science and that roadmap of how producers need to develop over time, we have to think about removing those small accounts, push them to, not removing them from the agency, not telling them to go get lost and find another broker because they're too small and we don't want them. It's that we need to put them into a different model, a select business unit or small business unit within the agency that has a different service infrastructure and allows us to be profitable on that account. We also need to establish a minimum account threshold for new business. So in addition to removing some of the small accounts from this producer, we want to establish on a go-forward basis for all producers that if an account can't generate a certain amount of revenue, then we're not going to pay commissions, producer commissions on that account. I guarantee you it is realistically the only way to get producers to stop hunting on small accounts. And so when they're out there looking at an account base and they find someone that's below that threshold, you have a small business unit or a select business unit that they can pass that referral off to. You can maybe pay some sort of a bonus, but they can't work on it. They can't spend time on it because it's just too detrimental to the producer's time and efficiency. And so when we think about, well, if they need additional support or we need to remove small accounts or we need to have a minimum account threshold, who needs to take action? And the answer is leadership. You're not going to have producers coming to you saying, hey, I want you to get rid of a bunch of my accounts out of my book. We have to take a proactive stance on that. Now, you will have some of them coming to you saying, well, I want additional support, and it may or may not be warranted, and you have to sort of adjust and understand what the metrics are, but also think about how does compensation tie into providing them with additional support or additional tools and resources. So as I alluded to earlier, I use the phrase science of book growth very often, and every time I do a producer training seminar and I'm meeting with veteran producers, I really try to talk to them and help them understand that over time we have to increase the average account size and decrease the number of accounts. And so when we do a producer benchmark on an individual producer, we have a producer benchmark report that we run for them. We plot them on this graph. Now, occasionally we'll see producers that have their dot is in this upper left section of the graph. And what that means is they actually have too many large accounts. And I know that's contradictory to what I just went through, but the problem with having too many large accounts are if you lose one, you have to go find a padded room somewhere and really cry out your sorrows because your income can drop very, very dramatically. And so we consider that kind of a book of business to be at risk because there's just too many large accounts, and if you lose one, that causes a lot of heartache and pain. But most of the time, I mean, probably at least 75 to 80% of the time, we're going to see producers in this lower right section of the graph, and that's where they have way too many accounts in their book of business. They can't possibly be servicing or even touching all of them, and so it doesn't make sense to have them in their book of business, and we have to look at trading out some of the smallest accounts to the house. So those accounts are now being serviced by in-house salaried personnel that are not commission-based and have a different service infrastructure, obviously, for those type of accounts. So if your producers fall into one of these categories, action is really needed to think about what their capacity is to drive growth. So the next T is training. We went through kind of the time, and now we're looking at the training section of the webinar. And training is when we hear from producers or when we assess them, is that they really just don't have the skill set or process to actually effectuate an effective sales model. So when we assess producers, we're really trying to understand, well, what is their prospecting methodology? What is their, what have they been, do they understand what the sales process is for an insurance sale? You know, how are they moving them through? How are they differentiating themselves? Are they able, if you turn to them and say, are you able to tell me why I should buy from you? And they can immediately articulate a well-rounded value proposition other than saying, well, we've been in business for 800 years, and we have the world's greatest service, and we can shop all the markets for you. And that's literally what every single agent on the planet says, and offers nothing to the prospect from a value proposition standpoint. And so the solution to not having the skills or process is training. We have to develop them. We have to have training and mentorship. And we define mentorship in 4 different ways. And this can be 4 different people, it can be one person, or it can be a subset of people that are, but all of these roles need to be filled with your producers, especially the ones that are not performing. So we have a closing mentor. This is the mentor that is going out on all of the sales calls. They are going out on appointments, and they are helping provide that frontline feedback on how they handled the meeting, whether they were prepared for the meeting. They do a debrief with them on the meeting and help them understand why or why not that prospect should or shouldn't move forward. And we also have a sales tracking and training mentor, or we've kind of dubbed this a prospecting mentor. And this is the person that helps them build a suspect list. Who are you going to call on? They've helped them build their differentiation strategy. What are you going to say when someone answers the phone or when you get introduced to someone? This is the person that is going to track their activity and say, hey, last week you made 100 attempts and you only got through to 6 people. Let's talk about when and how you're prospecting to see if we can increase that percentage. Or you look at other bottlenecks in their system of saying, hey, you were able to reach 27 people last week, but only one of them gave you an appointment. So let's talk about what you're actually saying on the phone to try to get in the door. Are you bailing at the first sign of an objection when someone says, oh, we're really happy with our current insurance? Or are you trying to overcome that objection and articulate a value proposition as to why they should spend any more time with you as a salesperson or a consultant? Then we have a marketing mentor, and this person's primary role is to really help the producer understand the marketing process to carriers. So once we have a qualified prospect on the hook, we've done the research, we've talked with them, we've gained their commitment, then we need to understand, well, how do we take an account to market? And this obviously is especially important on the P&C side when you're going to, just a large number of markets, but even on the EB side, understanding what is that marketing process. Are we doing spreadsheeting? Are we doing, wellness and benefits analysis? Or on the P&C side, what are the value-added services? Are we doing loss control mitigation? Are we doing any kind of claims analysis or risk management? But what is the marketing process of how we're going to take an account and build a solution for them. And then finally, we have an education mentor, and this person's role is to make sure that whatever your training and onboarding program looks like as an agency, we obviously have one built out for the producers that we coach and train and recruit, but whatever you have developed for your agency as far as technical training, sales training, onboarding, mentorship, learning about the agency, value proposition, this education mentor is the person that outlines that training schedule and makes sure that it's followed. And they look for opportunities for the producer to learn things additionally and get them signed up and registered. So again, who needs to take action on this? Is it the producer? Maybe, if the producer realizes that they don't have the skills or the right process, but a lot of times they don't want to admit that because it's sort of admitting to your boss, hey, I'm really not good at my job. So it's not going to drive a whole lot of producers to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm not skilled enough. But we have to take a proactive role, and we as in leadership in the organization have to take a proactive role in developing this talent. So I kind of already went through the 4 pillars of mentorship, so I'm going to skip forward to tenacity. We talked about time, we talked about training, now we're going to talk about tenacity. And this is really kind of the easiest one to examine. And the problem is they don't have the motivation or they're just complacent. This is by far probably one of the #1 problems that we run across as we travel the country into agencies is we have producers that have built up a book and they've built up a W-2 that they're comfortable with, that allows them to go and play golf or take off work, or they're working really hard because they have 800 accounts and they don't have the time. So, but we see this motivation piece and complacency being a real challenge for agencies because they're saying, well, this producer is validated, but they're really not growing or they're not really selling any new business. So there's nothing I can do for that, right? And the answer is absolutely there is, and that's to hold people accountable. We either need to terminate or affect compensation. If any of you on the line have had a sales job previous to joining insurance, and you think about what happened to you in that sales job when you didn't meet goals, when you didn't actually produce new business, when you didn't do those things that you were hired to do, you either had your compensation cut or you were terminated. And there was accountability inside of those organizations. But what do we do on the insurance side when producers don't meet goal? We say, oh, that's okay. Try harder next year. I'm sure you'll do better. We kind of coddle them because we fear their attachment to these accounts or to this book that they've built up. And so really what it ends up is that the CEO or the sales manager kind of reports to the producers instead of the other way around. And we really have a difficult challenge in this industry with accountability because we haven't built the right model. And we really have to affect either termination or negatively affecting compensation to drive motivation or complacency out of the water. For new producers, what we want to do as far as accountability is we put them on an activity-based compensation model. And that compensation model looks like this. So for a new producer that's being onboarded, we recommend a declining 3-year base salary plus commission. So not a 3-year draw or a 3-year, hey, if your book exceeds this salary, we'll pay you the additional. It's salary plus commission, but the base salary declines a third, and a third over 3 years. So if you start a producer out at $90,000 a year base salary plus commission, and then you reduce that by a third, so in year 2, you'll reduce it to $60,000 a year, and in year 3, reduce it to $30,000 a year. And the whole, basic concept here is that the goal is to make sure that their renewal book of business, or you're paying them as far as is going to offset, in this example, the $30,000 decrease in base salary, so that they can really at least maintain their income for the first 3 years as they continue to build a book of business and have the opportunity to grow even more. And so, but the caveat to the declining base salary is that the salary is also earned based on meeting qualified appointments. So what I mean by qualified appointments is, let's say we're paying a producer, just for nice round numbers, we're paying them $60,000 a year in the first year. That comes out to $5,000 a month. Well, what you want to do is do the math on how many qualified appointments are they going to have to generate in a year to meet the mathematical goals that you've set out for them. And so let's say that number comes back and it says, okay, they need to generate at least 5 qualified, and I stress the word qualified, 5 qualified appointments in order to meet their base salary. So if in month 4, you start the clock after 3 months, if in month 4 they only generate 4 appointments, then in month 5 their salary goes down from $5,000 to $4,000. And if in that month they only make 3 qualified appointments, then in month 6 their salary goes down to $3,000. And they can earn their way back up to the $5,000 but never go over. And then we're also paying any new business and renewal commissions on the accounts that they sell. So we want a higher base salary so we can attract the right talent, but we want them to validate that base salary based on hitting qualified appointment goals. For seasoned producers, we look at a carrot and stick model. So if you have a producer that's quote-unquote validated but not performing well, then we establish some minimums. And we say, okay, if you can't generate $50,000 in new business in a year, then next year your renewal commissions are going to go from 25% down to 20%. And if you don't meet $50,000 in that year, your renewal commission is going to go from 20% down to 15%, and so on and so forth. And then on the flip side of that is we're saying, hey, if you can hit a stretch goal of, let's call it $100,000, we'll give you an additional 5 points on new business. So if you look at a split of 40% new and 25% on renewal, the carrot is if they go over $100,000 in new business, you're actually going to pay them 45% on new. But if they don't meet the stick or meet the minimum, then in the next year they're going to go from 40-25 to 40-20, and they can always earn their way back up by hitting certain goals. So finally, again, who needs to take action? It's leadership. We have to embrace accountability within our organization and be willing to terminate. And so this graph or chart right here just kind of goes through that declining base salary. And in year 2, if we're using, you can see 5 appointments per month, then each appointment is only worth $667 and $333 in the 3rd year. And then after that, we take them off of the activity base because they've built the right behaviors. They understand what it takes in order to be successful. So this is just a quick example on the carrot and stick. This is if you hit your stretch goal. Your new business can, if you exceed your organizational goal by 20%, we take the new business up to 45%, all the way back to first dollar. So if they sell $100,000 and that's their stretch goal, then they get paid an extra 5 points or $5,000 on that $100,000 in new business, and then obviously it goes up from there. And then here's the stick, setting the minimum requirement at whatever level you set it for. We can help you, guide you through where to set that level. But going from 25% down to 20, down to 15, down to 10, if the minimum new business requirements are not met. So that is my time for today. I'll turn it over to Lauren if there are any questions, or if anybody wants to type something in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions on any of the material we covered for today.
Well, great. Nick, thank you very much. I appreciate, this is some great information. It's like drinking from a fire hose, though. I'm frantically scribbling notes over here and as you're going through some of these slides. And I definitely want to remind everyone, as Nick said, let's go ahead and get those questions typed into that chat bar, and then we'll get Lauren in here as well. She's in MarshBerry, and she'll take on any of the questions we have. But while we're waiting on some of those questions, a few things did pop into my mind. You're going with that first T, that time, and to me that always seems to be the thing that I hear a lot from my producers is the time. But as far as addressing principles, a lot of this content is saying, as a principal, what should they do? But let's say I'm a producer and I want to talk to my principal about maybe my book size and composition, what it's made of. Any tips for them, for the producer, on how to approach their principals to maybe get them to acknowledge that would be valuable to maybe buybacks in those accounts, the smaller ones, or best make use of that time?
Yeah, the best advice is just to do it early and often. So you're not going to, I hope that you're not going to find any kind of resistance from leadership on wanting to trade out the small accounts unless they don't have the model for it. And so what you might have to do is, if you don't currently have a select or small business unit within the agency, talk to them about establishing one and say, hey, I really feel that in order for me to scale my book, I'm going to have to hunt on larger accounts, and I'm also going to have to reduce my service load by getting rid of some of the smaller accounts. Do we have a model internally where I can transition some of those to a service person? And, typically our recommendation to agencies when we're doing this for the leadership is, pay out 1 year's worth of commission on those small accounts. So let's say, we're trading out 25 or 30 accounts out of your book of business. We'll pay you 1 year's commission, standard renewal rate, and we'll take them out of your book of business immediately and give you an entire year to replace that revenue with larger accounts.
Great. That definitely makes sense. Perfect. So, Lauren, let me go ahead and turn it over to you if you've got any questions from the listeners.
It does not look like we have any questions in the queue.
All righty. Well, let's go ahead and take a minute here to once again thank Nick and remind everyone that MarshBerry will be conducting 2 additional webinars for the remainder of the year here. And that's part of IBA Cal's agency management webinar track. And you can go to iiabcal.org to register and get more information. And then lastly, the thing I'm most excited about is Nick will be keynote speaker at this year's InsureFest, which is November 2nd through the 4th. That's located at the Omni Rancho Las Palmas Resort and Spa in Rancho Mirage. And Nick will be speaking on building your organic engine, attributes of the top performing agencies and producers. So you're definitely not going to want to miss that, and get everybody out there to take a look and listen to what else InsureFest has to offer. And you can get a lineup and ways to register. That can all be found on www.insurefest.org. You can get all information today. So once again, thank you, Nick, and I look forward to seeing everyone out in Rancho Las Palmas and on the next webinar. That will conclude our webinar. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.